So the checklist runs into 29 clauses and you can even add more. But what I'm going to go through is I'm going to give a sense of the structure of any contract, right? And that will explain what are the kinds of clauses. So you will have the title page, names of the parties, the recitals. Now, one thing you want to get used to, a lot of focus is on knowing and understanding. And even for me, when I used to read, I used to think I understand this, and that was it. Like if I could read something and understand, that meant that I know it. But that's not true. You might understand something, but to be able to write that clause is a completely different ball game. Your mind, your blood pressure, everything will be at a different level when you're actually doing the work. So you need to start doing that, like typing the clauses if you really want to get your hang of it. Okay, you'll realize that while you think you know everything, and you might really know it, there is a huge resistance that comes up while actually typing out a clause. And we noticed this the first time when we conducted something called the contract drafting marathon back in 2012, where everyone learned everything, everyone knew everything, and contract drafting is never rocket science. It is very easy. But what happened with them was that people, after learning, could not write the clause because they could not decide that whether what I'm writing is correct or not, and they would want to write complicated, use complicated language, and so what they would tend to write a simple language which works, but they could not trust themselves while writing that. So here are the now I'll just go through the clauses. Okay, if you see contract drafting textbooks, they just go either through multiple contracts or they go through each clause, and that doesn't help someone because some contracts have less clauses, some contracts have more clauses, right? And the other problem is that in India, when you sign a contract, the other party gets scared if they see a big contract. And we all want to win and look superior, but if you are looking superior to the other party before signing a contract, it's going to harm your position because the contract will never get signed. So you may not get the office lease that you want, you might not get the employee that you want to hire, or you might not get the investee company that you want to, the startup you want to invest in. So having a simpler draft is always useful. So when I go through the clauses, keep that in mind. Yeah, so title, names of parties, a brief recitals clause, that is actually like a preamble. It explains what the parties intend to do. It makes sense to focus on this. A lot of times, people in the operative clauses later on, when they define the obligations, sometimes they forget to write what the contract is all about. Why? Because I need to write what A's responsibilities are and what B's responsibilities are. So, what is the relationship about when it's A plus B and everyone doing everything together? What is that about? That doesn't get mentioned anywhere else in the contract. So, it's best to clearly express it in the recitals clause. The courts will use it for guidance when there is a doubt or a dispute. Okay. Um, then there is an introduction clause that there will be definitions, which is usually the first or second clause. And before the definitions, after the recitals and before the definitions, you will have a clear clause which says that parties have, in exchange for the mutual promises and consideration that's been set in the agreement, they've agreed to do the following. Like, this clause is crucial. You should not miss it because it actually says that the parties have given consideration for each other's promises and this is what they've agreed to do. And it is a clear evidence that there is consideration, and nobody can say later that there was no consideration. Then you move on to the definitions clause. It's important that, so the definitions clause is the part where you get the opportunity to be creative and specific at the same time. Every contract has its own set of technical terms, and you might want to define certain expressions to have a technical meaning. For example, in every franchisee contract, you will say the franchisee as a franchisee of the franchisor's business, right? So you will have these opportunities where you limit what a word means. So then an English language definition will not be looked at. So you define these clauses. You need to ensure that unnecessary terms and unnecessary definitions have not leaked in from a previous template that you used. You also need to ensure that all the clauses that have been given a technical meaning below in the document are defined. And this is a live contract. So as you keep drafting, this is a live clause. So as you keep drafting the remainder of the contract, you might figure out that you want to give meanings to other terms in the document. And you can define either in the definitions clause, or you can also define next to the place where the term is used for the first time. People use a combination of both methods, but the most systematic one is that even if you've defined a clause later on in the body of the document, it makes sense to say that, let's say, assigned rights refers to its definition in clause 17.1, for example, where it actually indicates that every defined term will be found in the definitions clause and there is no hidden definition. And then you can do a control F and find that clause and then see what its definition is. So then we move on to the operative clauses. There is at least, so you will be saying what is each party's obligation. And a lot of contracts have this written in a very confused way. Like there are shades of obligations that different parties have. And it is not connected. Like it might be written that this party's role is to, like in a franchising agreement, one party will give its franchisee to another, right? And the other party's obligations are what? That needs to be clearly written. There are no shades that this is my function, and then somewhere else it will be written, this is how I am to perform my function. And then somewhere else it is written that if I don't do X, Y, Z, then this happens. But the thing is that the connection between these three clauses should not go missing, which is why it should say in the operative clauses where the obligations are being defined that the function of the franchisee is to, let's say, sell the franchisor's products as per the quality levels that have been defined, that have been specified by the franchisor from time to time. Okay, or as communicated in writing from time to time, or as specified in the schedule. The other part you need to be creative within contracts is schedules. So schedules and annexures are what you can actually, whenever you have technical information which parties can add to, subtract, modify, put that in a schedule. And the schedules need to have mentioned in the main body of the document. Otherwise, they are merely reference material. They will not be binding. So when you have this there, then you have a valid obligation that is being written. So sell the products as per the instructions of the franchisor, with the quality levels or with the duty mentioned in the agreement, with the levels of duty or levels of care mentioned in the agreement. Then the obligation is linked to the level of care they are following. Okay, so that will ensure that you have tight drafting. And when you say level of care, there you can write some more standards which are general, which a lawyer can write, which are applicable to such relationships, which don't require basically technical details that the parties only can put. So that linkage is important. The other linkages of the consideration, when the money is to be paid, what time, how, outer date for it, mechanism of payment, some bit of fixation has to be there that this is how it will happen, some determinate way of paying. Okay, and in case there is delay, what's the consequence? If you don't specify a consequence, you're going to have a hard time recovering money. And that happens with many service-based startups in India, that they just don't get the money they bill, and a lot of 50% or more of their money is pending at any given point of time. They have huge credit cycles. So this is stuff that sometimes lawyers miss to say, because they say that this is your commercial deal, you have to structure it. But these things you can include. There are other strategic ways to ensure that you get paid on time, which is taking registration under the MSMED Act and then including this fact in the notices or the bills that you send to the party that you're working with. But we'll keep that separate. So there is this set of operational and commercial clauses, which I just explained to you. Then there is a set of representations and warranties, which are that each party is communicating to the other about what is its current state of affairs. So let's say tomorrow you're dealing with a US-based company. Later on, you figure out that, oh my God, these guys, you figure out through another friend that these guys are not even validly incorporated in the US. They are actually a company from the Philippines where they were actually banned from conducting business. Their registration was deleted. If you figure out this, then what happens, right? You should be able to immediately terminate the contract and go back. So the representations and warranties give you this basic set of assumptions based on which you are contracting with each party. And these assumptions are to be correct. These are very important in case of investment agreements, in any deal, especially the more intimate, the more comprehensive the nature of the collaboration, the more comprehensive your representation and warranties can be. It could be about your incorporation, your authority to sign the contract, the validity of your obligations, that there's no other contract which is saying that this relationship that you contemplate is illegal. In IP contracts, wherever there's licensing assignment, you have to always say that I have the rights to license this to you. So I am the owner, or I have the authority from the owner to sub-license this to you. So that kind of a thing. Then there is conditions precedent and conditions subsequent. So conditions precedent is that now you can sign a contract. Okay, now that doesn't mean that you have to instantly follow it. You can have a period of time where certain actions need to be taken, and after they are taken, that's when the obligations become effective. So this is specified in a conditions precedent clause. What all must be done so that this happens? Like in an investment agreement, you will have completion of due diligence to the satisfaction of the investor. Issues that are found have been sorted out. Lots of things will be there. Now, so these are important. Now, this is from the perspective of the investor. Usually, the startup doesn't say that there is any condition precedent to receiving the investment. The startup wants the investment immediately, right? Without anything, also it's fine. So anyway, so these would be the conditions precedent would be there. The obligations get triggered off at a point which is called completion. Okay, if you don't have conditions precedent and completion, then there's a strong likelihood that your contract is immediately applicable upon execution, unless you've mentioned some other dates for performance. If you've not done that, it's immediately applicable. Most parties mention a date, or when there's a complex set of actions to be taken, they say that at an event called completion. When does completion happen? Completion can happen in many ways. It can happen when all the conditions precedent are satisfied. So when the last one gets satisfied, then, or when even this is complicated to determine, then they say that after 3 days from the last one, when it gets satisfied, and when some representative from each party says that this is done, that's called a conditions precedent satisfaction certificate, CP satisfaction certificate. So when that is done, then it is satisfied. And what happens then? The obligations get triggered simultaneously. In an investment agreement, the investment hits the bank. The investment is to be wired at the same time. Shares have to be issued, and articles adopted, amended articles have to be immediately adopted. Board resolutions have to be passed. Like all this happens together. That's what is called a closing. Okay.